Member from Kitchener-Conestoga.
Yes, thank you, Speaker. But before I get started, I'd like to welcome MP Michael Chong from Wellington-Halton Hills. But before I introduce Michael, I want to congratulate him on his last week's third reading passage of the Reform Act. So congratulations, Michael. Welcome to Queen's Park. So thank you, Speaker, for the opportunity to speak to a motion that is so important and yet would be so unnecessary if only this Liberal government didn't thumb its nose at public accountability, didn't sneer and jeer at the prospect of having to fess up and answer questions that people across the province have been asking since first hearing the audio tapes that clearly record job offers in exchange for political favour. The audio is crystal clear and transcribed in black and white. We hear Jerry Lougheed Jr. say to Andrew Olivier, "I come to you on behalf of the Premier," before discussing options in terms of appointments, jobs. The Premier's Deputy Chief of Staff seals the deal in declaring, "You've been directly asked by the Leader and the Premier," and then in the next breath clearly offering the spurned Andrew Olivier a taxpayer-funded job, whether it's a full-time job or a part-time job in the constituency office, whether it's appointments, commissions. And yet the charade continues, and it demands that we in opposition use every tool in our chest to demand answers, to demand accountability, essentially to demand responsibility from a government that has turned its back on the very concepts of responsible government that our country and our provinces were built upon. We've seen it in the handling of the gas plants to secure a handful of seats, in the refusal to allow testimony from Liberal staff and friends that were paid to delete emails to cover their gas plant trail. And we see it today and every day since the resumption of question period, in the refusal to answer questions, in the red herring finger-pointing, and in the complete affront to accountability that this government arrogantly sticks to as the questions mount on investigations and apparent bribery breaches due to job offers to a loyal candidate they simply had lost any use for.
Shameful. Shameful.
What happened to the Kathleen Wynne we heard preach new focused dedication to transparency? Where is that dedication now? Where is that promised transparency? We thought, the people of Ontario thought, things would be different with a new Liberal leader pledging new directions and new commitments to accountability. She told us that things would be different. Yet we continue to fall further down that same unaccountable rabbit hole of diversion and debt that Mr. McGuinty dropped us into before hightailing it as his house of cards began to crumble. Quite frankly, the people of Ontario expect more from their elected representatives. They put their trust in government, and they expect those they vote for to make decisions that impact our daily lives, to act with honour and dignity, to be accountable and to be responsible. Accountability and responsibility, Speaker, two words that have provided the guiding principles for modern democracies, and specifically our Canadian and provincial democracies, since the adoption of responsible government in Upper Canada back in 1850. All members of this legislature should be familiar with the concepts of responsible government. We pass by a plaque commemorating the dedication and work of Robert Baldwin to responsible government every day. Speaker, Mr. Baldwin would be turning over in his grave on a daily basis if he saw what the current government has done to the principles we so hold dear. You see, responsible government is championed by Mr. Baldwin, whose legacy surrounds us today is government that acts with the consent of the representatives of the people. It's because of the work of people like Robert Baldwin that we no longer have government answerable only to the authorities in Great Britain. According to the concepts of responsible government, government is to be responsible to the elected representatives of the people. And yet today, some 165 years after Baldwin's work to instill these concepts, we see a government that works to oppose these cornerstones of democracy at every turn. You see, Speaker, in the responsible government that Baldwin worked with and handed down to guide future generations, it was understood that a government official or a minister responsible to the elected representatives of the people should act, step aside or resign if their accountability was called into question. Baldwin himself took the honourable step aside on numerous occasions to ensure his government accountability was not tarnished. That's what responsible governments do when under investigation. When under a record 4 investigations, they act to ensure their accountability is above reproach. The funny thing is, Speaker, that while the Premier told us she was moving away from the McGuinty trail of scandal and towards embracing accountability, the truth is things may have actually gotten worse. At least McGuinty governments knew how to make their officials step aside when their accountability was called into question. There was David Kaplan, former health minister, finally opting to step aside at the centre of the e-health and OLG storms. And then there's Greg Sabera choosing to step aside in 2005 following the fact that he was a target of a long-running criminal investigation into a company he was a board member of. Both were McGuinty ministers, and yet both understood the need to remove themselves as accountability questions mounted. On our side of the aisle, of course, we have our current and our one-time interim leaders, Jim Wilson and now Senator Bob Runciman, who knew what to do when accountability was demanded. And yet these same concepts of accountability and responsibility now seem foreign to this government. Instead of doing the right thing and having her Deputy Chief of Staff, Pat Silvera, removed from office following the Election Ontario finding of an apparent breach of the bribery provisions of the Election Act, we see this Premier go in front of cameras to completely duck accountability and attempt to divert attention with a fantastical story pointing fingers of blame and smear at the entire PC caucus without producing one shred of evidence. Hardly accountable, Speaker, and definitely not responsible. And not satisfied to stop there, she took it a step further, telling media and investigators alike that as to the possibility of charges for Pat Silvera, on our review of the matter, we don't expect that to happen. I again question why an elected representative, why a Premier is commenting on her expectations for the outcome of an ongoing investigation into her own staff. So again, with regard to today's important motion, Speaker, I fully concur that the Premier, her Deputy Chief of Staff, and Jerry Lougheed Jr. have breached the standards of integrity and accountability that are required and expected of the office of the Premier. We hope for better. We expected better. And the people of Ontario deserve better from a government that has turned its back on the pillars of responsible government our system is built upon. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.